Dr. Cerullo, so 7 years, 9 months ago, maybe a couple days prior, something goes through your mind that starts this teach anti-bullying phenomenon that you've created here. What was going through your mind prior to starting such a movement?
Yeah, a large Italian voice. Large Italian voice who later becomes my wife in this year says to me, have you ever thought about starting a nonprofit? I didn't know much about the nonprofit community. I was an educator for 25 years plus, still in education. And she came to a workshop I did on children who've been victimized with learning disabilities, special needs children. Having a son on the autism spectrum who was a victim since kindergarten, her son David, she approached me and said, what are your thoughts about this? You know, I'm part of the PTA, and we could get a group of other parents involved and perhaps launch this. I said, well, it's wonderful. It's what I do. She was coming out of corporate America, certainly as an event planner, you know, and working as a producer at Fox News in Philadelphia. She can kind of put those intricate pieces together. I would do the education part, build the curriculum and the infrastructure. And I took some money out of my pension to start this program, do all the paperwork, and we launched Teach Anti-Bullying in 2011 in November as a 501c3 nonprofit. And then as it progressed the preceding years, and then we went national, and now we've been in 33 states in this country, and the numbers kind of go to about 103,000 in children in 33 states.
Children that you've spoken in front of.
Audiences of children at various events, in school, out of school, community centers, YMCAs, you name it. 26,000 plus teachers, and roughly around 12,000 plus parents, which include the law enforcement communities of very different law enforcement organizations across the country.
So you're in this first workshop. You had not met your current wife
Correct.
At this time. And was this the first workshop that you had ever done, or is this something you had been doing prior to, even before the nonprofit?
I've been doing this by myself for 25 years prior, and as an anti-bullying expert. The organization did not exist, but I was just an independent expert talking about the issue of school violence prevention as well as anti-bullying educational awareness by myself, just with my own little website at first and going into schools and various community groups talking about the issue, this pervasive problem.
Was that something that you did on the side because
Correct.
you've been in academia for 25
Right.
years, you had full-time jobs or things that you were doing. Was that something that you were doing on the side?
Correct. So I was a school principal. Okay. Prior to that, I was working in higher education. I was the governor of Delaware's director for youth mentoring. And then prior to that, I was a school teacher for the last 6 years of my career, starting my career. So this was always
for the first 6 years.
Yeah, for the first 6 years. But this was always there as I went through my graduate program in educational psychology and later in educational leadership. I saw inherently it all started with why are kids coming to school inherently more violent? And it went back to 1998 at Paducah, then 99 in Columbine. And I started to kind of do more and more research.
While you were doing your dissertation at that time.
Research at looking at why are kids inherently more violent? Why are we having more active shooters? Not even realizing, going back to 1998, that the issue of bullying would surface, really come out in its entirety in 2006 when CNN ran its first report on Phoebe Prince, who ultimately committed suicide to social media bullying. There was no tagline bullying prior to 2006, so we just talked about school violence. And kids were probably victimizing themselves in various different forms and realms before Facebook and Instagram. And those things didn't even exist well until around 2008, 9? Yeah. So they weren't even there as social media apps.
Has social media both propelled bullying to occur more and helped it?
It hasn't really
how do you
helped
feel
at
about
all.
that?
It's really more exacerbated the issue, certainly. And as kids become more and more clever, and certainly more and more apps are created, whether it's at the high school level or collegiate level, which we've seen many of them, one being Yik Yak, that was developed by students on the campus of Fordham University.
What's Yik Yak do?
Students at the college level of Fordham University in the Bronx developed this app called Yik Yak. And it's an anonymous app that they can basically send terroristic threats to a school administrator, police departments.
Wow.
And by the time they uncover where that actual signal is coming from, the threat has already been made. So whether it's calling in a bomb threat or an active shooter, so it causes havoc. It caused havoc for the Boston PD, Chicago PD, Philadelphia PD. So by the time they try to trace it, no one knows where it's coming from. So that, these are very creative apps that are ingeniously created by students, by people we try to deflect, and help, but they're causing more and more problems in the social media world.
So 2006, would you say that was the beginning of where that started to have, I guess you could say, almost a branding to it?
Correct. CNN, once that media story broke on Phoebe Prince, all of a sudden bullying became like it just exploded and went viral. And everyone and everything that had to do with an incident of an altercation of violence tagged it as bullying. The problem is what's unknown and what we struggle with, not so much myself, but many educators and parents are saying, and they're using it too loosely. So everything now is bullying. I may not be nice to you. Well, you're bullying me, or you're being mean to me, or you're making fun. It's not that, by definition, that's not bullying.
How would you define bullying?
So when you break it down by definition, first of all, we have to look at what is it and what it isn't. And by definition, if something happens even in a period of time of just 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, and it all starts with I wake up in the morning with an agenda, and you and I are in the same language arts class, but I just don't like you. Maybe because of your ethnicity, your race, maybe you're a better athlete, maybe you're smarter than me, so I'm going to start my victimization towards you or your friends early in the day. And it's probably, we'll say it started to this morning, maybe with some name calling, some verbal harassment of some sort on the bus, at the bus stop. I take it into the school, and it progresses during the course of the day. So now we have some level of duration, right? It's occurring frequently throughout the course of the day.
It's not just once.
It's not just once. And then it's probably already happened prior last week, maybe Monday, Tuesday. We're now into Wednesday. I'm still doing it because, again, I wasn't fond of you Monday. I'm not going to be fond of you today. So now we get an intensity to that. It's getting worse for you because now you're coming home. Your parents are saying, well, how was your day? Well, my day was good. And you got your head down and you don't really want to get, well, tell me about it. Well, I don't really want to talk about it. So you go to your room. Well, where's your backpack? Well, I left it at school. What do you mean you left it at school? This is the second one we bought you. Why are you missing a shoe? Why are you missing an iPhone? What's going on? So the children, they're already in silence. So then you have that power base. It's either me by myself, because I'm ultimately intrinsically stronger than you, because I'm empowered to be, or I get my additional colleagues or friends, right, my peers, to gang up on you. So you have that power base. So you have a duration, frequency, intensity, and power base. If they're all in the same position, either one day of what I've done to you, or the course of a week, a month, or an entire school year, without any intervention, you truly have a case of bullying.
So duration, frequency,
intensity, and power base.
Wow.
In the forms. Now that's the criteria. Now that criteria is the same criteria that we would look at for domestic violence, child molestation, elderly victimization, child abuse. It's just that we, in many organizations, whether it's the NFL or the Crimes Victims Council, may tag it as different, but the criteria is the same of when somebody wants to inject some form of hatred or pain psychologically or physically towards you. So you're going to have that imbalance of power. And what the bully or bullies want is to cause you some form of suffering, either, again, physically, psychologically, which on the psychological realm, we're looking at that social, not wanting to have you participate, not wanting to be a part of my cafeteria group or playground group or what have you, because you're just not cool like we are. You're really a worthless person, or you're not part of the cool kids.
It sounds almost like how the country started. The founding fathers and the British,
exactly,
like that power base, that power
correct.
difference.
And the English had it. The English had it, and we were pretty much submissive to that until you had a group of patriots, okay, led by Sam Adams and others, who said, we're not going to take this anymore, and we're going to fight back. And they fought back, and it was interesting. I was talking about World War II, and we talk about when Adolf Hitler came to be, but you understand, Adolf Hitler as a person was a victim himself. He was extremely abused by his father. He was ridiculed, called stupid. He was kicked out of the army 3 times until the rank of corporal in World War I. And it wasn't until the Germans got beat in World War I till we had all these reparations for them to pay. And then he wanted to blame the Aryan race of the Jews, that the Jews, in fact, caused the war. It wasn't for power or anything. But when he came, the Germans were looking for a savior.
So in the throes of potentially Adolf, even being a young adolescent that had a difficult relationship with his father and taking that out, and everyone everyone in and around his life.
Correct.
And all of those other conflicts going on in society, it almost sounds as if you're in a group, like you're in the school, you talked about intensity, frequency, duration, and that group power base.
Correct.
The group power base of like a country that's been through so much. It was like, in a sense, a giant macro bully situation. That these things reflect themselves in every level.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, honestly, you can come up with all kinds of variables. Would World War II have happened without Hitler? Probably not, although we don't know. You still had Benito Mussolini, you had Joseph Stalin, I mean, you had Japan. And this is just an example on the scale of world history, like dominance of a bully or bullies themselves. They're seeking something, right? Some type of attention intrinsically, some power to feel superior over you. And there has to be that superiority. There has to be, and it's not necessarily some level of high self-esteem. I mean, there's people who have low self-esteem and they still have that power base to have that subservient power over you in whatever form or realm they're into.
So in the example of like a school, with World War II, for example, and the Founding Fathers, they were able to get together and actually physically win. Right. In the school setting, I would think, being a layman in this conversation, that necessarily may or may not be the right choice. What are some of the solutions for the child being bullied when if they, because they can't necessarily go to war, I would think, right?
In a school setting, the challenge is empowering a child who can't self-advocate for himself or herself to have the term we're using now. In the social media world or cyberbullying, where we use a bystander. That person who simply is going to get out the cell phone and start to record the YouTube video to try to see if they can get that to go viral. We need more upstanders. So if the child can't self-advocate for themselves because they're just not that type of person, maybe they're just shy and submissive, or they have a special need, and they don't have that advocacy, we hope that kids will start to be upstanders. Is the new Wikipedia word we're using for kids to come in and wrap around them and say, leave him alone. He's going to eat lunch with us, or leave her alone. And they start to show the bullies that you're not as important as protecting this particular child. What we often fail, though, is that we have to remember that bully still needs support, too, because there's probably some underlying trauma that hasn't been addressed. I say this all over the country. Children aren't born from a mother's womb, and they come out, and the pediatrician says, here you go, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, here's your deviant child. They're going to be grown up to be a bully, and they're going to be incarcerated, and they're going to be whatever. They're a product of their environment. And whether or not that environment is healthy or not healthy will often dictate how that child will behave in a setting. Now, and the other issue, though, which is interesting, is sometimes you have parents who are wonderful parents, and they instill all of these wonderful manners in the children, but they don't even realize that their children are bullying other children at school or on the playing field or in a club or activity because that child has been kind of inundated by that environment, whatever that environment is at school. So we send our children off the thresholds of school as good kids, but depending, as we say to kids, well, who are you hanging out with? Mm-hmm. Who are your friends? How do you start smoking? How do you start drinking? What
so how does a parent potentially parent in the school? Like, is there two different conversations? There's the teacher's responsibility conversation, the student's responsibility conversation as an observer, the parent's responsibility conversation. If it seems it's in business, if it's everyone's responsibility, it's no one's. What's your opinion?
A school,
your expert
school is not. One realm of a school is not much different than corporate America. We know people no differently than why does harassment. We're going to talk about bullying in school, harassment in the workplace. In a school setting, it is inherently the teacher's responsibility. The women wearing hairnets in the cafeteria, the custodian, anyone in charge, certainly the building principal or administrator, anyone in that school who's held accountable to make an observation of a child who perhaps is left by themselves on a playground. Why would someone not say, why is that little boy coloring on the playground and he or she is by himself or herself? Why would a teacher not observe that and react and say, well, let me go tend to that. What's going on with that child?
Are the teachers educated on this intensity, duration, and power-based conversation?
No, and
frequency?
that is our disconnect in American public education.
You just taught me that in 20 minutes.
It is the major disconnect. And so we employ, schools predominantly will buy a program, and kids like our kids would come home with worksheets, and they'll say, well, why was Janie not playing with the other children? A, B, C, or D, and you fill it in. It doesn't help to resolve the problem, and they don't address it on a routine, weekly basis.
So it sounds like the children that see this need to be educated to do something, not just stand by, and the teachers have to be able to recognize the signs.
It's a triangular approach. So we're going to educate the children, and we're going to educate the children beginning when children, if you remember, going all the way back to preschool. When you were 3 years old, and you would probably recall your parents or someone telling you, keep your hands to yourself. At some point, somebody taught you that, right? Indoor voices. We don't run. We don't run with scissors. We don't throw pencils or paper across the room. Somebody taught you that, and you probably remember that. Whether you applied it or not, it's another story. As we progress into the elementary school, these children are still intrinsically and cognitive learning skills on how to develop social and emotional relationships with their peers in school, and the teacher's reinforcing that.
Like, it's a very important time in the development of their...
When they come home, it is inherent upon the parent to say, and we do that with elementary, what did you learn today, honey? And the child, oh, well, I learned how to do this, and I learned about George Washington. He was the first. Well, what else happened? Well, some kids at lunch weren't very nice to me today. You know, they didn't want to talk to me, and they didn't want to play, jump rope with me on the playground or basketball. So a parent would say, well, why do you think what's happening? Now, that parent right there should send an email to the teacher and say, my child is saying X, Y, and Z. Can you maybe observe tomorrow to figure out what's going on or not going on? Some children, however, come home and they simply, proverbial expressions, it was good. I have nothing to report. And why we call bullying the silent threat is because kids are suffering in silence. I myself was a victim of this, beginning in 6th grade.
Okay, so prior to 6th grade, in 4th and 5th grade, it was all rosy? And then there was was it one experience that started the snowball, or was it a...
It was fine for me in elementary because no one really looked at me as having to have cool things. Elementary is generally, even if you wear silly clothes or clothes that don't match, they don't...
What age range is that?
So we're talking about beginning 8, 9, 10 years old. So 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade.
That's...
Playing kickball.
There's less, so like from a psychological development stage, young children, they're not worried about those types of things yet.
Grade, you don't care if you're matching your socks. You don't care if your shirt matches your belt or your shoes match your belt. You're just going out. Some kids will wear 2 different shoes and they're fine with it. And kids will laugh about that, but for the most part, nobody's paying particular attention to whether you have Jordans on your feet or I had Zips back in the day, which were called Bobos. So...
But 6th grade, like those ages start to shift.
The shift predominantly occurs in middle level. And now middle level children, taking yourself back to, I remember 6th grade like it was yesterday, to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, or in some compositions, it's going to be 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, a junior high concept, and some schools are still there. Everything is about appearance. Everything is about self-worth. Today, if you're not wearing Jordans, or you don't have an iPhone, or you don't have a certain kind of backpack, or you don't have a 3DS, not a 3DS, a new and improved, you're pretty much not part of that mainstream. So now you're open to all kinds of scrutiny from kids. This is physically, personally in the school. Not even in our generation, mine, there was no social media. No one was going to go home and say, Claudio had the most ridiculous holes in his feet and his shoes and had 2 different socks online.
It couldn't spread
on Instagram.
like that.
There was no fire. No domino effect that we have today because of social media. Why social media is wonderful for the communicative realm and being able to expedite a message, it's also very destructive.
So in the sense of like those ages and that 7th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, because technology is so accepted and easily attained at those ages, it's like propagating and compounding the explosivity of the judgment, because that's when judgment starts.
Going back to our original discussion, looking at history as a topic, how did we used to spread the message, and how did Hitler or any other world leader? Through propaganda.
Yeah, okay,
so
yes.
propaganda today is social media. Social media is our greatest form of drama. I can put anything else out I want there, whether it's true or not, we don't know. And, the media will certainly can twist it one way or the other way, and people are going to basically, if it's perceived, it's believed concept without even further looking into, well, what are the facts of the case? What are the facts of maybe, the child can't afford shoes because his parents, one father lost his job, or the mother is working 3 jobs. I mean, maybe shoes, just having shoes, but not having expensive shoes. So, but unfortunately, the sad part in the disparity of the haves and have-nots, and we're still in the haves and have-nots, black and white, that culture, that following, right? There's still that following of Nazi Hitler. That's still there, present in parts of the South. And these people still aspire to this man as a god. Similarly to kids who aspire to certain rap stars or athletes. And so if you're not that kid that is that cool kid, you are now subjected to tyranny. And to the point where our biggest issue in our organizational realm is children who are now taking their lives at roughly 4,400 a year to the suicide rate.
Has that increased?
It has increased, yes.
Is there specific metrics? I think I saw something recently. It was like 50-something% suicide.
Correct.
Or something.
So 13 to 19 years of age, we lose 12 children every 9 seconds. We lose roughly 4,400. It went up from 4,300 last year. This is the Center for Disease Control in Washington telling us these stats, and predominantly to suicide of various issues. But we know that social media is a prime contributor because of the taunting, anonymous posts, anonymous what we call Finsta, and fake Instagrams and fake apps and fake profiles. So we didn't, back in the day, you just got beat up and you got ridiculed for it, but you didn't have to worry about hiding.
So in 5th grade, things are all right in the sense of that. 6th grade occurs. Was it the first few months? Was there a time in the beginning where it started? And was there, I guess, the frequency, the intensity, the duration, the power base in your specific circumstance before social media?
So for me, here's the dynamics of my family structure. So my parents had me at 43. So I make a joke of it that I say I was a Catholic accident. Although I believe I've been brought here to do something now, nearing my 50th birthday this year. However, my siblings, they were 19, 17, and 14 when we emigrated to the United States from Italy in 1975. So we arrive in the Lehigh Valley in an area, eastern Pennsylvania, predominantly known at the time. We had Larry Holmes, who was one of the greatest heavyweight boxing champions of the world, great sports, colleges, and so forth. However, Italians weren't very much welcomed because in our area, we were a minority. And certainly, if you were an athlete with some talent, that was frowned upon too by many kids that I grew up with, because God forbid you came in as some Italian to take over somebody's position. That wasn't going to happen.
Wow.
So you grow up with underlining talents. You don't know whether you're a good singer or a dancer, or you play sports, you're fast, whatever. I had some talents. And so I started to kind of, as you play in street football and all this stuff, kids say, well, you're good. Why don't you play football? Why don't you do this? Well, my father, ironically, said he never allowed me to play Pee-wee football, this, Pop Warner football. He thought I would get hurt. Who'd have thought that my pain didn't come from playing sports as a young child until I got into high school? It came from the ridicule of not playing.
Not being able to put it out.
Well, because kids would call me various names, referencing me to women's vagina parts, referencing me that I was then getting into the ethnic slurs. I was a Dago, I was a Guinea, I was a Wop. And I always say, what does that mean? I would walk down the hallway. A perfect example, I would remember leaving Mrs. Scheller's class, making a left turn to Mr. Reed's reading class, and they would walk down the hallway and say, hi, Claudio, how did your day go? And I'd say, oh, pretty good, Sarah and John and a group of kids. And I didn't know what that meant. And it would say it every day, same time, same back channel, etc. And the Dago, during the days of Italian immigration, they would pay Italians as their day would go. If they had a good day, they got paid. They got a bad day, Italian immigrants would not be paid between 1880 and 1920. WAP would stand for Walking Without Papers. Many illegal Italian immigrants would come to this country through Ellis Island, and they would have, Tony on their paper. And The Godfather kind of illustrated this, but to New York. So they would change their names. And then you had Guineas, which Guinea was synonymous with the African word and the N word in the African American community, but they would be from the country of Guinea in West Africa. So they would refer to Italians who were dark complected as Guineas. It's like we were basically African American in nature, or Italiano Neros, or black Italians. So these things in Italy today, if I walk down the street and I say, "Oh, tu sei un guapo," somebody would, be either very offended by that because that doesn't exist, although they know it's slang because the Americans made it up. And they made it up during those days here in the United States of 1920 onward. And then, some of these reality shows use it as in comedy things, and so kind of blossom.
However, at the time, it was...
Yeah, I mean, they're ethnic. It's like calling somebody the N-word, or you're all these ethnic slurs that you may talk, whether it's Polish or Jewish or whatever, they're still intrinsically painful to someone, right, from that particular culture. So it started with that. From that, it then continued and exacerbated where, this particular scar on my finger here, it's still very visible. I remember the kid's name, Jimmy Saylor. I'll never forget it. Was a big football player, pushes me into a fire extinguisher and slices my finger open. It cost me 8 stitches here in this pinky. Every day, same kids. I know, and it's interesting.
Was it 6th grade?
Yeah, 6th grade. Then coming home, and I could never match anything, so clothes, it was kind of funny because my parents wouldn't take me to a store where you could buy clothes that match, which is probably now why I'm so obsessed with making sure everything matches from head to toe. And I think when you grow up poor, your parents say, this is what you're getting. You're not going to get more than this. But that started all of the physical and verbal abuse. And I'll never forget it as I got into middle of 6th grade. Then I was walking home trying to figure out, the middle school was roughly 6.5 blocks from my home. I would walk to school. A group of the same kids, these kids were of different ethnicity. I would walk down an alley, and every day they'd say, there's that Dago Guinea Wop kid, and they would call me retarded and stupid. And I just minded my own business and kept walking until one day it was always trying to get me to fight. And, I was always afraid of fighting to get hurt. I was not that type of kid growing up. But I think as we get older, that aggression builds in there. But one day I look up at a portico, and I just happened to kind of glance. You know how you don't want to bother with somebody, kind of just keep your business. And they started to whale rocks at my face. And they caught me in the face, so they shattered my nose and they shattered my front teeth, which all have been rhinoplasty replaced in my teeth. And I went home. I never forget it. I took the bloody clothes and kind of hid them on top of the below garbage and took a shower. And I didn't want my father or my mother to know. And I failed. I didn't know any better. If you don't tell your mom you have a fever, she's not going to give you aspirin or try to help you. And nor did I tell my mother that I got hit in the face with rocks and showed her the clothes, because number one, she would be very emotionally, upset about it, and then would tell my dad, and it would probably get worse for me. So no one knew what had happened. And as you can imagine, if you have a broken nose and you don't apply ice, your nose grows to be a big bump, which I kind of illustrate photos of that. And it healed as such, and nobody knew and nobody was the wiser. The problem is that now I want to say I'm disfigured. I got a chipped tooth, which I said to my father, I fell at school. I'll never forget it. So he took me to the dentist. They fixed the tooth. It's not as cosmetically as the way it would be today, as dentists can do. And then the nose healed the way it was. So 6th, 7th, the end of 6th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, I was the nose, always knows. Ask a question, Claudio knows, and knows always knows. Playing football, I would get tackled. They'd say, wait a minute, we need to I think the young man broke his nose. I had such a big nose here, like a ski slope, that even it kind of got in the way of my football helmet. And then in 11th grade, the helmet hit the bridge of this big nose, shattering the nose again. I'll never forget it kind of spread across my face, which caused me to have another surgery. And then the regular ENT who can fix the nose says, I'm sorry, but I can't put your nose back to normal. I'm not a plastic surgeon. I was like all excited, I'm going to get my nose fixed.
Yeah.
So it didn't work. And it wasn't until the end of my into my senior year that I finally convinced my father, who laughed. He says, what do you mean? What's wrong with your nose? It's a Roman nose and a bellonage, a beautiful nose. But he never knew. And I didn't dare ever tell him what had happened, because knowing him and knowing that he was like Mussolini as a dictator, he would have said, well, wait a minute, he would have taken me by the ear to these kids and would have, caused problems with the parents, or said, why didn't you fight them back? And quite frankly, at the time, I was afraid of them. I mean, there was always 3 or 4 or 5 of the same kids every day. So I didn't do anything and just tried to figure out which way to go home. But just like in, whether it's Jumanji or some of these movies where the kids just come around with the bikes and try to find you, you either fight back or they're going to get you. And isn't that the same concept in prison? You have to kind of stand up for yourself. And that's why I think there's a lot of people that frown upon this term bullying. Like, it's like nonsense. Like, what do you mean bullying? Why don't they just kick somebody's butt, fight back?
Yeah, how do you do it when you're an individual versus a group?
Yeah, or maybe you're just not that type of person. You're afraid you could get hurt. You could get, who knows what could happen to you, number one. And we often say fighting back is not the answer. Taking karate is not the answer. I mean, there has to be a way to diffuse this issue. Right? Just the same thing do we have to go to war to resolve a problem? Can't people, conflictually sit down and say, what are the issues here that we're not resolving? I mean, I can't change being Italian. I can't change being fast or whatever it was that these kids, they just didn't like me. It was pretty basic. And even as we grow up into adults, and I know particularly in the workplace, you work with people who are not going to like you, maybe because of your color or you're taller or you have straight teeth. There's various reasons, and we always tell children, it's not you. You can't take it personally. But over time, if I continually say to you, man, you're just an ugly person, and you might be and that's why they often say, well, wait a minute. That child took her life, but she's so beautiful. It doesn't matter. I can make you ugly. I can make you think that you're fat even when you weigh 100 pounds because of that intrinsic abuse. I continually verbally taunt you to the point where you're going to feel there's something wrong with me. They said I was fat. I must be fat. I must be stupid.
Just talking to you, I can remember every memory of, the kid that was like, you're a crack baby.
Sure.
Or the internal mechanisms that got me to stop studying in 6th grade and start working out like crazy was my internal view of myself, what truth was it really founded on? Like, I felt I was so overweight, being like 20 pounds chubbier than the other kids, that I would grab my skin and try to like rip it off. I started running every day. My entire life from that 6th, 7th grade became, I got to be the biggest. I got to be the strongest. And they clinically, like they say, the bigorexia, like I was never big enough of the bodybuilding. And I can freshman year, I'm in the weight room with a good friend of mine who's like, he's the kid that's just good at everything that I really respected. And I never forget, we're working out together, and the senior, who's like the head of the football team, he comes in and he high-fives this kid. We're both freshmen. The kid that's good at everything. Sure. And he's like, hey, you coming to the meet on Friday, the weightlifting meet? He's like, yeah. And I said, yeah, I'm coming too. And he looks at me, you.
Right.
You're not invited.
Sure.
I spent every day from freshman year in the gym until senior year. By the time I saw him again years later when he graduated, came back, he didn't even know who I was. He's hey man, you look great. Right. I was 230 pounds. Now all of the destruction in my life, right? Mm-hmm. That was the effect of that sole focus to fill some kind of. I don't even think there might not even be, like, learning from you today, there might be people that don't even know they were bullied that bullied. Like, they don't even know they were bullied.
Correct.
And they bully, and they don't even know they're bullying.
Well, that's what happens. That's what happens. You go from being the victim to the perpetrator.
When you're in your beginning stage of high school, did you know that you were going to get into education? And I'm curious, was it because of this? Was it because of all the things that you were overcoming, do you believe?
So my initial aspiration was to be an architect like my brother. However, as I kind of progressed mathematically, I just didn't seem to ever excel at it, except for some areas in geometry, but it wasn't enough to say that I would have the mathematical capabilities of being an architect or some form of engineer. In ninth grade, I started to finally take honors classes because I was tired as growing into the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade where I was called stupid and kind of pulled into what we call resource classes. Even though we didn't have, like we do today, in terms of IEPs or classifications, because I was an ESL student, not having English as my primary language, going home was a challenge for me because my parents did not speak English. So I had neighbors to help me with math or English, or my sister would come and have to interpret. So I had a lot of wraparound people that helped support my parents to get me through school. And then in school is where I would focus all my attention on learning the information. And it wasn't until ninth grade when I started taking a number of honors classes that one teacher, Mr. Lou Holly, particularly pushed me. He was a great history teacher and so hard as a history teacher, but I would get C's and B's, but he would say, but I see you working so hard, even though it doesn't come easy to you like the other kids. And he said, you're going to take history again in 10th. And I went on to continually study history and get into political science and economics. Initially, I thought then from there, I would want to go to law school until my first class on constitutional law, the professor says, there's more lawyers in law school than there are in the country. And he discouraged me from even thinking about wanting to be a lawyer because we thought that being a lawyer was what you see on TV. So I would sit in courtrooms and just kind of observe myself in our Northampton County Government Center. But then it wasn't anything like that, the way they explained that when you go to law school, it's nothing like that. You're writing all the time, and it's just briefs and more writing, and it's not like trial law, and it was nothing like that. So I said, well, what else am I good at? So social science, social studies, political science, economics, all of those, anthropology, psychology. I said, let me go and be a teacher. Maybe with the fact that I was an athlete, I was a successful athlete in track, wrestling, and football. And I enjoyed other aspects of singing and plays and yearbook and all these things. Maybe I can impart this expertise on kids in school. Wow. So I went on to become a teacher, social science education.
Well, it's powerful because it's almost as if a blessing in disguise in the sense of, architecture, that's distant from people. Right. Law, in that sense, it's distant from that energy. And everything else is, in a sense, a healer.
Yeah.
And social and psychological, right. and bringing people up, like everything that you've been able to. So that's I'm curious to overcome. Correct. Because think about it, if the level of the statistics of children that aren't with us anymore because of trauma, even 1/10 maybe as difficult as you've been able to overcome. Where do you think the courage came from you to not quit on life? You're consistently put through this test of strength, right? It's Nietzsche that said, a lion will not be angered over a mouse. His relative power is too great. Defensiveness betrays weakness. I interpret that as our insecurity, our internal conflict is actually when we overcome it. Yeah. We become who we are, as Nietzsche would say, in a sense. Like, have you ever thought that through?
I'm not sure if I've ever...
It takes a special person, I think.
I'm not sure if I've ever overcome it, even to this day. I think there's a lot of internal trauma, unresolved trauma on various fronts, regrets of like having to be, I say like the carrying the crucifix throughout Jerusalem, having taken care of both elderly parents, not having the relationship I would have liked with my brother, who I recently lost last year of cancer at 66, having sisters who could typically be my mothers, it was hard, and always being bullied by my own sibling, my brother, who was the king of bullies, because I was the little brother. And, we know the dynamics of brothers and sisters, and that doesn't always, even though they're your blood, doesn't have to be they're going to be your best friend. And so when you have a brother who's, 17 years older, that wasn't fun for me at the family dinners on Sunday anyway. And then in part, the abuse I took from my father, even though he loved me, it was like unconditionally, but in a very warped way, in the sense that it was a beaten kind of abuse, but tough love abuse. He taught me what he wanted to teach me, but at the same time, he wanted to protect me. But yet it was, if I didn't do what he said to do, the way to do it. And a perfect example was when I was 21, as the clock would start to get closer to midnight, I would get more and more nervous, and friends we would be out. I turned 21. You can drink now. They'd say, "Why you always look so nervous? Why have to be home by 12? It's home by 12. You're 21 years old." Well, if I don't get home, my father will lock me out, and he would lock us out. My brother, even at his age, at 26, or me, because he says, "Well, you live under my roof. If you're not home by 12, you will be." And he got a deadbolt and locked the door. My poor mother would sit on the steps. I'll never forget it, the stairway, and hear us when we would come, and we would knock if we were late, and she'd open it up so my dad would not hear us, so we can go into the house. So, I was not only bullied by peers, but I was abused by my father, even mentally and physically. But I accepted it because I knew that he loved me. But then you got to trace the roots back. When you do the psychological intake on family, where is the trauma? How far back does it go?
Do you believe your education, you went to Moravian, East Stroudsburg, and all of this education you've done, studying psychology and history, did that self-discovery through education help you understand these things?
It doesn't help me understand me as much as I can look. And if I took myself out, I know why I am the way I am and who I am, but I can certainly sit back and dissect any child. And I can see it. Sometimes as the parent, we don't see it of our own children, but it's very simple for me to understand why a kid is hurting, or why even an adult is hurting, or why there's the insecurities. And it's not difficult to understand when you look at, somebody's parents or the children or brothers or uncles around them, how they're just inundated with who they are and who they become. And that's why the cliches are very simple. Surround yourself with role models. My father would always tell me, surround yourself with people who are better than you. And he would say, I'm not worried about you drinking and driving, but I am worried about the people around you drinking and driving. That's why I want you home by 12. Now, that didn't make sense to me at 21. And then at 26, I remember legitimately, usually I would BS my father and come up with some lie to be home later, but I went out on a date. The girl had a flat tire. I go home at 4:30. I came to park in the parking driveway, and I saw the back light on in the kitchen. I knew. I was prepared for the crucifixion. I opened the door. My father was suffering from emphysema at the time. He had the oxygen cord. He had an oxygen tank. And the oxygen is made of that plastic, that rubber. He took that and whipped me across the face and the back. That the next day when we came on Sunday for the family dinner, I had a tank top on. And my brother said, well, how did you get all these scars? And I said, Pat, I was doing the bushes for Papa. I was cutting the bushes. And everybody knew. He wasn't stupid. I didn't rat my dad out. But there would be times I'd leave the dinner, or I would get.
I want to say that if millions of people, including myself, have been bullied, it takes a very special person to take that and speak in front of 103,000 children. Seriously. And that is your superpower. Yeah. Is that if everyone, that's the thing, man. Culture Matters wouldn't exist without the deficit. Meaning it takes more energy to go from a negative 150 to +1 than it takes to go from 0 to 5. Yeah. And my pain is why I'm useful. Right. My pain is why there's purpose, being real with others. But not everyone that will go through that much difficulty, that much external stimulus to shape their world, would not only forget about the people that would just off themselves. Forget about that.
Yeah.
The people living quiet lives of desperation.
Correct.
The people that, you got your doctorate, you went to school, you're in school for 11 years, a principal of a school that's a great income for a family to build a life, and to just put all those things in the back of a treasure chest, lock it up, and put it in the basement, and instead you decide to speak in 33 states.
Sure. Correct.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
And, teach anti-bullying. What is the next step, the next stage for your organization, the impact that you're having on students all across the country?
Well, we have
What drives you at this
we
point?
have several missions and underlining objectives and goals that we need to accomplish. The most critical part of a nonprofit or any nonprofit organization is raising revenue. We struggle, and most nonprofits struggle, because while we work day jobs, you illustrate a principal, and my wife works, it's very difficult without an army of people to help raise revenue, to get a message out there. You can only get so far on social media, or certainly doing an interview, or reaching, a limited audience, even though you want it on a national level and you want to reach the person at the White House who can make decisions. So that's first of the objectives, is to try to figure out how we can continue to raise revenue to be able to do more for kids, because there's not enough time in the day or the week. The second thing right now critical to us, certainly living in Pennsylvania, and we've been working very hard with two state representatives, Donna Bollock out of Philadelphia and Stephen Kinsey out of Philadelphia, who are our legislative champions. We have proposed anti-bullying legislation, and we hope to pass legislation to protect children in the state of Pennsylvania. Working in New Jersey, we have legislation under former Governor Christie. In Pennsylvania, we do not. So
what does that mean for the children of Pennsylvania?
So hopefully, if we in fact get anti-bullying legislation passed, it will do two things. One, it will protect children, because it would be a reporting system to the Department of Education of bullying is in fact occurring. It would give more education to teachers who have to get professional development training and anti-bullying education.
So
right
they
now,
have to
do it,
okay.
At least 5 hours of it. And then you would be cited as the parents of the bully, in increments of $250 on to $1,000, depending on the severity and the incidences of your child or children bullying others. So you're hitting them in the pocketbook, just like when you would smoke in the bathroom, you would be fined in a school setting.
So children right now the parents would be fined if their kids smoke in the bathroom?
Not in Pennsylvania.
Where?
Oh, I'm sorry, in Pennsylvania for smoking, yes, correct.
So, and has that proven to work?
Well, sure. I mean, you slap a fine on a parent, and then they say, well, you're going to pay it. I'm not paying it. Yeah. So the child may not smoke in school again. So it stops them from doing that in a school.
So in the sense of bullying that's occurring at a rampant rate that's increasing every year, teachers getting educated on what you were talking about, the triangle, which I want to wrap around again, explain that. And these students, parents, having some kind of responsibility or skin in the game if something were to occur.
Correct.
And what kind of support is needed to have this legislation go through? Is it guaranteed? Is it up in the air? How are you?
So, every legislator has constituents to report to, and the one thing a legislator doesn't want is to put more or greater stress or mandates on a school system, certainly a school superintendent. But we've made it as generic as possible. And the concession, as I've spoken to Representative Kinsey Monday night, is that the focus will be on middle school. Rather than say it's going to be K-12, at least the target audience, which is the most critical, is a middle level. So that now...
Like young, is that the thought? Have them
let's
young
get the
when they're
middle level
developing?
kids, because that's where it's really occurring. It's really at its height. And now he has more Republican supporters of the bill. So I think that we have more ammo to move this bill into potential legislation. And I think that now on April 2nd of this year, we're going to have another legislative hearing in Philadelphia and a rally in Harrisburg to continue to keep the momentum going. This will be our second time.
In 2018, and towards the end of the 2018, you were gifted an award.
Yes.
What was that award?
Well, two awards in 2018. One by Representative Kinsey, an outstanding service citation for my work in Pennsylvania, and then the Global Humanitarian Award that was given to me for my work internationally to help expand the mission of bullying throughout the world.
Those rewards, do you believe that that's a reflection of people being more open to have the conversation that bullying exists and that the solutions are on in the future, in the near future?
Well, the conversations that people want to have are the parents and certainly people in the community at the local level or even state level. I think that I often use this word for leaders. Educators still have ostrich syndrome, and an ostrich buries their head in the sand. And I think in schools, they're still afraid to talk about this topic, certainly in parochial and private, because it affects retention. So it's like a fire, right? Or if I yell bomb in a movie theater, everybody's starting to panic. So what do you mean there's bullying going on? Why are we having an assembly on this rather than be proactive? What's going on that you're not telling me at Catholic school or private school A or B or whatever? Public schools may or may not have some assemblies depending on funding, but they still feel that bullying becomes a red flag for conversation rather than my position or our position is, why are we not talking more about a pervasive issue, whether it's cancer awareness, autism awareness, or anti-bullying awareness? These issues are affecting people.
Well, what's extremely powerful about that sentiment is that in the corporate space, culture, inclusion, these things are becoming more prevalent.
Social justice, right.
The soft skills that are becoming more hard skills, like the corporations educating their employees. Right. It's like, in a world where we have access to so much information, how could we not educate young adults, children on the soft skills, on being able to communicate effectively with each other, work their problems out with each other, in a world where we're all connected with information? I would even say that probably in the next 10 years, this type of education is what education is, in a world where we could Google any answer that we're trying to memorize for a test.
The problem is that you would be an excellent resource for that yourself as a human being if you can get kids to stop doing this all day long and look at somebody and listen, right? Because as you said before we started a conversation, we have to do a better job of listening, but kids aren't listening. And so when a kid is not being heard by someone like a teacher or somebody on the other side, they feel that I don't have a choice but to take my life or take your life or others around me because you're not listening to what I'm telling you. I'm telling you I'm being victimized. Children on the autism spectrum are rarely believed. They lack credibility because they have these delusions that they're not being victimized. So parents in many states and schools have to put a bug on them or a recording device. And we just saw 3 cases last week on Facebook where they're being ridiculed by teachers. So the question is, just because you're a teacher, a police officer, or a pro football player, that one-time person when you were that bully back in the day, not you, but the bully, you're still that adult bully who's victimizing people in the workplace, and we're just classifying it as harassment, right? Yeah. I mean, whether you're kneeling...
So this isn't central to only... It's not just in school.
No, it's in the world we live in. There's people that still don't like Jewish people, Italians, Polish, whatever or even right now, we're building a wall. We're building a wall, and I get it, to keep illegals out of here. But where my daughter goes to school, there is a large influx of Mexicans. They're bullied every day. They don't want them there. They feel like they're refugees. My daughter tells me they make fun of them. They're shunned. They're only in their own little social group. Or somebody who's from a Middle Eastern country. Well, you must be a terrorist. You must be a terrorist.
In the sense, it's almost as if, like, psychologically, because of cultural, like from the highest all the way to the bottom, they're just like smaller and smaller and smaller reflections of the big conversation that when people separate themselves from others, when they don't know how to work through their own psychological trauma. You said it earlier about the bully having a reason to take something out on someone else. Right. They couldn't work that through. So think if the bully doesn't feel like they're heard, and their only way to work it through psychologically is to, instead of cutting their wrists, push a kid.
Sure.
it creates this vicious cycle. So what is your solution? I want to be clear for people that see this triangle of like, I learned a lot actually, but for like if people are watching, put the video down or give it to one person so you could grab the kid and like stop it. And then, teachers need to understand to be able to observe these things. The frequency, the duration, the power base, the intensity. It's like, it doesn't take a rocket science to understand. What are the other pieces of the triangle?
So the solutions are difficult. We need to reduce it. Kids ask me all the time, Dr. C, how do we end bullying, or will it ever end? Probably not, right? Because it's hard to take somebody who is not a nice person and make them a nice person. We all work with people like that. And unless they're willing to reflect intrinsically and say, I have some unresolved issues that I have to work with, regardless of my external color or ethnicity, there's a reason why I don't like the person that works with me, or I don't like the person that works with me because they got a promotion, or because maybe they're white or they're black or whatever color they are. But we have to first define the issue, and it has to be an infrastructure around the curriculum that addresses the issues within a school. See, most people who want to deliver programs, they're delivering it from a financial need, but they're not understanding what really happens within the classroom, within the school building, and the surrounding portions of the building, playground, athletic fields. So one, that's missing. Two, they don't talk to all the players, and all the players are not just your children, it's the teachers, and then the parents, and then those people who are involved in the school community.
So like the culture of the school, based on the relationships of parents, teacher, principal, whoever.
Everybody who's involved or works with children have to be educated. Just like, for example,
raise the awareness.
Going back to the days of Richie Incognito, who bullied Jonathan Martin, right? Richie Incognito was a bully in 5th grade. He was a bully at Penn State, University of Nebraska, ultimately got to the NFL, was bullying Jonathan Martin, ultimately then lost his position, got arrested, and then now he's some anti-bullying advocate living in San Francisco, which is ironic. He went from bully to 5th grade to advocate. And Jonathan Martin now is playing football with the Miami Dolphins. Many people look at a little boy who shares the name synonymous with our 45th president. Yeah. I was just helping this little boy, Joshua Trump. Why would a little boy with the name Trump, synonymous with our 45th president, be a victim of bullying for 2.5 years in a Delaware middle school?
He was bullied for 2.5 years.
For 2.5 years, and we recently honored him back in December, and the president invited him to the White House in the State of the Union in February. Somebody taught the children who bullied him, obviously, maybe they're Republicans, maybe they don't like Donald Trump. So where does that on a small scale illustration, how does that happen? Just because your name is Trump for 2.5 years, so the parents ultimately wanted the child's name changed in the school system, as well as going back to the father's name, the mother's maiden name of Berto, just so he would be able to free the abuse of being a Trump. And I said, no, you're not changing your name. I encouraged them not to do that. This story went viral back in January. Every news media outlet covered it. And ultimately, this young man was invited now he's the face under Melania Trump's Be Kind initiative.
So if you think it's, psychologically, this is something you've lived. This is not a theory.
Correct.
Those experiences, you didn't take your life.
Correct.
You didn't give up. You turned it into a light.
Right.
The dark is outshined by the light. I think of Gandhi. Mm-hmm. I'm not calling you Gandhi, but hey, Gandhi, with nonviolence,
correct,
beat the British.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King, nonviolence,
that's correct,
beat the British. They were both influenced by Jainism.
Correct.
An idea like the philosophy or
Yeah.
What about the children learning how to choose love of self, like taking their personal responsibility and
sure,
being able to deal, because in a sense you did.
Correct.
Example, I was in a meeting last summer. It's 1 and 4 other people. And this meeting of owners of companies ends up turning into one of them getting up, coming around the table, in my face, cursing and swearing, chest up against me in broad public at night because he didn't like how I didn't fall in line with the condescension, right? The energy that was coming at me that I took as force.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And in that moment, I had to make a decision. I'm going to fight this guy. One push, and he had permission to hurt me.
Sure.
A lot bigger. And I never forget, I said, I tell the truth. I said, how you feel right now was not my intention, and I apologize for where you are, and I appreciate who you are. And he ran away, like literally just ran.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Who I was based on like how I thought and how I spoke and how I habituated myself in the world 7 years ago. Right, everything was built around my external bodybuilding, like strength, was really like it was really inverted who I really was in my core. I definitely could have taken him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've learned so much from you today. I'm just like, now my mind is racing all over, this. What would you say to a child of what they can do that you've done to take responsibility over like their personal power, their personal decision for that, how they could stick up for themselves? Because you have. You turn it into a nonprofit that's helped over 100,000 students in 7 years, about less than 8 years.
Well, I think the challenge, though, for a child, like when I was a child, is making a decision of whether you, like you made it as an adult, do you either fight or flight? Do you stand up for yourself and retaliate? As some dads will say, well, why didn't you just, kick his butt or punch him in the face or knock him out? Or why don't you walk away? We tell most children, certainly that are victim of bullying, to report it, and then for others to report and support, and certainly wrap around that child to not engage in physical altercation back, but to walk away, because that's being the bigger person. What does engagement do other than complicate matters worse? As an adult, we know, and I've been in situations where you want to perhaps engage in an altercation, and it happens a lot during football season when I'm a Cowboys fan in Eagles country. What would happen, though, if I struck back and hurt someone? Because like yourself, you have that aggression to do it. I took it out on sports and bodybuilding. We share that commonality, and that's where all my intensity went, into sports, into being the best I could be. But what if you hurt somebody? Then what? Your career, what you've built, goes away because the bully expert, Dr. Cerullo, gets involved in an altercation, ultimately hurts somebody, and is now arrested for aggravated assault or simple assault or harassment at the very least. Now, what did that do? What did I accomplish? What role model did I share for children who say, well, you're supposed to promote being a role model for this? There's other ways of dealing with the conflict, and sometimes the best form of the conflict is just walk away from it. Now, the challenge is you're still walking away with that aggression, and unfortunately, you're like a bomb. You're a time bomb, because that threshold, if you don't get that help at some point in your life and be able to decompress and diffuse that or de-escalate it, it's not going to go away. It's still there. And when you grow up as big people, we're big people, we still have that internal trauma, something your father did or your mother did, or maybe you were abused by an uncle or an aunt or whatever. It's not going away, and it never goes away. You just basically are still in silence, living in silence. But you're happy, you dress nice, you try to do things, but there's triggers that occur, whether you see something or you hear something, that ultimately exacerbate or bring that rage out, because it's never been healed.
So your main focus is educating and raising the awareness of the children to know what to do when they're in the circumstance, of other children to know what to see, of the teachers to know how to deal with it. And I can attest to that, because personally, if it wasn't for 8 years of internal psychological focus and development, which ties us back to the interviews and wanting to learn how to listen better, I wouldn't have made the decision I made. And I'm happy with the decision I made. And we've since forgiven each other in that scenario. And I can say that I believe in what you're doing because I've seen it myself, is that if it wasn't for education of myself, if it wasn't for raising self-awareness and being honest with who I was and where my conflict was, I know I wouldn't have taken the road that I hope that all of these young adults, the children and people, both in school and in the workplace, will make that decision to take the high road, as they say, through education, through what they're learning. I think that it's part of why we're doing this. The more visibility, the more of the conversation is out there, the more people will be open and curious. Would you agree?
And that's the sentiments that the state representative expressed as well, that this discussion can't just die, and we can't just talk about it in October. You know, most people, we just got out of February, which is Black History Month. So do we stop talking about Black history in March, April, May, June, and December? So we can't just focus on a theme because it's the theme of the month. We have to have continually ongoing dialogue to help at least reduce the issue. And I think the schools, we do a very poor job. We're all about the academics from getting to A to B, but if you don't feel safe physically and mentally, then what's the point of getting good grades if inside you're internally you're killed, you're scarred, you're not healing from that. We don't devote enough time in a school setting to the healing part. And some schools don't do a very good job of it. So that's why we not only talk about the education, but we talk about the wraparound service. We talk about empowerment. We talk about kids starting anti-bullying clubs in their schools.
Oh, like in the school.
In the schools. We've done that successfully here in this region and within the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, and we did it in New Jersey. And they're successful because we're empowering kids to take over their schools and to really, in part, say to the bullies, we're not intimidated by you. We will get our education, we will learn, and we will thrive to be better, but we cannot live in fear any longer. Just like when we're policing communities, the more visibility we have, the less crime we will have. But then the other piece of it is the parental piece, educating them of the pitfalls of cyberbullying and the many apps and fake apps that kids are downloading and hurting themselves online. I mean, it's just like putting something on a package saying, or medicine, this is the pitfalls of taking this incorrectly, or these are the side effects. But unless you're willing to listen, or schools are willing to be open-minded to have parents come out, which rarely they do. Only the parents of the proactive parents come out, not those of the bullies, so to speak. We get very low turnout. So
what do parents need to do? And what do they need to know first, and then what do they need to do?
Well, first, parents need to be certainly aware of what is on a child's technology, whatever that gadget is, whether it's a cell phone, an iPad, a computer. They need to know, what are the kids getting involved in? Like right now, you may have seen, it's all over Facebook, this whole Momo app, which is basically teaching small children in the elementary ranks to take their lives by suicide.
Crazy.
So certainly Facebook deemed it, enough to put out there, and YouTube is sharing the pitfalls of it. But now every school, and I know I got a notice, and many parents got a notice that watch this Momo app, watch what your children. But some parents are vigilant and some are not. So that's why it's important. We're not just talking to the kids and the teachers, but what about the parents at home? It's like getting that message out to an entire audience. If I were the president, I would be on every channel talking about it. Unfortunately, we only get so many minutes on a TV show or a media segment. But parents certainly need to be aware of these pitfalls so that they can educate their children and monitor how much time they're on a particular gadget or the cell phone.
If a parent finds out that their child is being bullied, what should they do?
So online, it's very important. One, with a cell phone or an iPad, take a snapshot of it. Make sure you secure the evidence of what's going on so you can develop a paper trail. The next thing you want to do is make sure you're communicating via email to the teacher, the school administrator, or the law enforcement. Don't just pick up the phone. There's no documentation that you even have any.
Is that for the duration, to log the duration?
So
it's like an ongoing.
So you want to make sure that there's a dialogue between you and the teacher. I have communicated this. My son was being bullied. My daughter was being bullied online. This was the predator app that they engaged in, et cetera. And then if you have to file a non-criminal complaint with the police, here's the evidence that shows what the child and what they said. I have screenshots of it. I have emails which have an IP address that I can trace. All of this stuff we try to tell parents, this is how you're going to safeguard yourself, at least if you're going to move forward with some type of civil suit or criminal charges, you have some evidence of that. In a school setting, if something is occurring, whether you're being verbally or physically harassed in some way, report it right away to your teacher so that they can address it. The challenge for many schools is that they're not educated on what bullying is, so they're not addressing it correctly, and kids aren't held to some standard of a consequence in the school for it. In New Jersey, certainly there is policy, and so within 48 hours, if I tell you that I'm being bullied or a parent calls me as the principal and says my child is being bullied, I now have to launch an investigation. That's what we want to do in Pennsylvania. Similarly to what happened at Penn State under Jerry Sandusky. Now we have sexual abuse investigations, and we're more vigilant about what's happening under Title IX and social justice. Inequalities on a college campus. I mean, so we're being more proactive about sexual abuse within the church. I mean, this is all part of bullying. We just segregate it separately, but it's still been happening. You know, sexual abuse is bullying, you know, by the clergy. That's bullying a child. We didn't even get into the manipulative, conditional, exploitative forms of bullying, which is sexual abuse. That's a whole nother segment.
Well, we will film that. And we'll put that out there. Now, the bully. Yeah. Is there a step 1, step 2, step 3, at least an understanding at the beginning of the process of this child has done things? Yes. Well, can we? What's the solution? Lock them away?
No,
I don't know.
The solution is not incarceration. It's not. There is some form of rehabilitation, but first of all, you have to do an intake to determine why is that person doing that. There's always a causation, right? I'm not just going to be mean to you because I don't have anything better to do. Something is happening. You know, I think of an illustration in a workplace. If you have minority groups and the one minority got a job, right, and the other ones don't feel that he or she should have gotten the job because of their ethnicity, how do I change that? If I don't like white people or if I don't like black people, how will you help me to understand, other than through some form of empathy or holding someone accountable, right, through a verbal or written reprimand or ultimately termination or relocation of that person or persons? How does it get resolved?
So get to the root of it first.
You have no choice. So when I would deal with the bully, and I would deal with I would always first just deal with the victim and find out what happened. Then you bring the bully or the bullies in and you determine, and they ultimately say, well, I don't know why. I'm not sure why I did it. I was wrong. And you try to get them to resolve the conflict, right, through some form of peer mediation and shake hands. And then I ultimately get their parents involved. And when the parents come in, they're like, well, you did what? You said what? And they pull them by their hair and get them out there and kick them in the butt saying, never again. And the parents are like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was happening. And when they see what they're doing online, I didn't know it was happening. Well, why not? You own that iPad. You pay that phone bill. You're ultimately responsible for that minor. So we don't often get to the root of the problem because we're so busy and inundated on our own self-absorbed world as adults ourselves. We're doing our own social media networking that we don't even know what our children are doing. So we're guilty of that, not helping to reduce that problem. And then shame on the administrators or a school system that doesn't want to look at the internal problem, because if it's happening once, just like in any organization, whether it's the church or work organization or corporate America, it's happening more than once. And if a bully's doing it to one person, chances are they're doing it to other people. It's just that whole domino effect.
Going back 7 years and 9 months, 8 years of this organization, knowing what you know today, helping all these children, yes, we've lost children. At the same time, you've saved many.
Yes, we have.
What would you tell yourself, everything that you've learned up to this point on saving so many lives? What conversation would you have yourself if you knew what you knew today and you could go back right before you started this organization?
Well, I think we've learned every case is different. And I think that we extend our time and we communicate. I think one thing that I've learned is I would like to have a greater degree of experts on our team and people who perhaps would be more proactive or active in engaging our mission, not only regionally but nationally, spreading that message. I think that would be something. When I go back, I wish that we would have more of the intricate pieces, the marketing, the pieces that we really need to spread to more outreach would be really. But I think we've done a very good job, and I think that ultimately, this is not to be biased, but as an organization, we're so small, but we've done so many great things in such a short time, and we've done it because we are a grassroots, and we have people on our team that have been victimized. We have people who, are parents, people who are educators and social workers who truly understand the issue, and we do what we say we're going to do. We don't give worksheets. We address the problem. We interface. We mediate. We advocate. We really do push hard. We're just missing that financial backing to be able to do it much. Like, people call and email us all the time, and there's not enough time in the day to provide free resources. And the tragedy is when you say, well, we've prevented suicide, we could prevent much more if we didn't have to be, if I could say, well, I can come out to Idaho for free because I'm getting funding to fly out to Idaho. But, if there's no people to be helped out there or resources, what is that child or parent to do? Somebody might lose somebody there because they may not have a suicide hotline or resources locally. Or in many cases, even law enforcement, they don't even want to get involved in certain aspects of it unless it rises to the level of a crime. So I think that's the big critical piece for me is that if we had greater resources, our outreach or our reach would be greater.
Batman did it.
Yeah, well.
And he was the billionaire. So you've been able to help so many people through personal responsibility of taking conflict and making it a light for others. How can people reach your organization to be able to, let's say they said, you know what, this is someone I believe in, this is a cause I believe in, how do I support this cause so you can fly to Idaho and help someone and speak in front of 1 million children the next 8 years?
Well, first of all, they can call us directly. We are often, we answer our phones most times of the day. Sometimes 7 days a week, we'll return a phone call or an email to 484-431-9711. And certainly I teach antibullying.org. We ask for volunteers. Certainly there's a donation page. We've just upscaled and renewed our whole webpage. But we're very accessible as an organization. We really do have people who care. We have an executive director who's very compassionate. She's a person who's a giver and a doer, and she's very diligent about returning calls and getting to the root of the problem. And certainly we have a team of board members who are very proactive and engaging as well. But everyone is very compassionate to try to help somebody in need, and we do a lot of it in kind. I mean, that's really somewhat the struggle, but certainly donations and financial support would help us.
Part 2, we're going to get into, you said exploitation,
yes,
and manipulation,
yes,
and this is an ongoing conversation.
Correct.
This is not, we could never cover everything in one conversation, but I have to say today has dramatically inspired me. I've learned, frequency, duration, intensity, and the power base, like those things are pretty easy to remember.
Correct.
If you see them. Now, if I see that somewhere, I know what to do already. You've raised my awareness. So I have to say, for myself and Culture Matters, Dr. Cerullo, this was amazing, and I look forward to next time.
Thank you. It's been an honor.